Okay, here we go. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yesterday, of course, we talked about the different, well, it should be 132. Okay. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لأن أقول سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر أحب إلي مما طلعت عليه الشمس. Let's see. And 132. The Prophet ﷺ, for me to say, glory be to God, praise be to God. There's no God but God, and God is the greatest, is more beloved to me than what the sun rises upon. No, the translation is not looking good. Let's see. What does subhanallah mean? We talked about that yesterday. We said, certainly, glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way, in a sense, that you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center and that you glide surrounding that center, which basically comes from that subhana, but is subhana actually means subhana actually means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be exalted from any description that might not be giving him glory. So what does that even look like? Well, that looks like that you would regard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center. That would look like that you would regard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as nothing is like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is the one that gave life and death. He is the one that gives the rizq and takes the rizq. He is the one that gives the different provisions. Well, that's the rizq. And He is the one that gives happiness. And He is the one, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَمَاتَ وَأَحْيَا وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ رَبُّ الشِّعْرَى. رَبُّ الشِّعْرَى. What is the shi'ra? Is that the poets? No, it's not the poets. It's basically that He is the Lord of the star that you would see twinkling up in the sky during a dark night. You would see it right there, shining star right up there. What about the shining star? Why in the middle of the ayah tell me that He is the Lord of that shining star and not tell me He's the Lord of the clouds? Because during that dark night, you would see that moment of a shining star just in the middle, right of all that darkness that covers the horizon. So just as you would see that shining star up there, twinkling and just blinking right in the middle of a dark, dark night, you would recognize, just as that star up there that you cannot get to, and who knows how many light years it is far away from you, you would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer than that star that is blinking very far away. But your Lord Almighty is the Lord of that far away star, and you that is very near. And to the Lord Almighty, the far and the near is all basically the center. Allah is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not distance and not time, and certainly and not anybody or anything is going to be far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless the person wanted to be far in the deeds and in their distance from their own choice, that they did not want to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and wanted to turn against. So, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ رَبُّ الشِّعْرَى. This takes us, subhanallah. All the glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because everything recognizes وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. Everything gives that glory, that return, that moment of gliding, that worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in a way that you may not recognize, because it's following a command and it recognizes the glory to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, walhamdulillah, and all the praise be to the Lord Almighty, because if we do not recognize, what's the difference between alhamd and ashukr? Ashukr is when you wait for something in return, but alhamd is that you recognize that all the praise, whether I recognize the result of it or whether I don't recognize, all the praise goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be the only one to deserve all the glory and all the praise, and everything announces it in harmony from the tree to basically the trees that are bending down, growing on earth like cucumbers or watermelon, etc., or the trees that are standing up high, or from the skies and the stars and the clouds that are around you or above you, and depending on what situation you're in, everything basically sings in harmony, La ilaha illallah, and announces Alhamdulillah. And La ilaha illallah. Here they said no God, there's no God but that's actually an oxymoron. It's not that there's no God but God. It is there's no God worthy of worship but Allah. So why can't there's no God but God be accurate? Well, because the people of Quraysh, it's not that they didn't believe in God. They believed in God. And they just didn't believe that there's only one God to be worshipped. But to say there's no God but God, that's an oxymoron. The cup is there, but it's not there. Well, is it there? Is it not there? That's an oxymoron. You're self-contradicting. So right there, when you say La ilaha illallah, you take to recognize that just as you had testified that everything is centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is the center to give life, to give death, to give provision, to give the energy to continue in any way, which is the provision to continue in existence, it basically gets one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center. Two, all that good, the provision, the life, the energy, the power, everything is basically going back where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to basically be praised for it. So therefore, once we recognize that foundation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center, is the one that all the blessings and all the praise go back to Him, that's taking us to the other stage. The first stage is recognizing. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, that's the stage of recognition. La ilaha illallah is another type of recognition, which is the recognition where the person is going in a stage of ibadah. So the first one was relating to the tawheed, that you're recognizing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second one is recognizing that worship is centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why He said La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah, after doing the first recognition, then I'm going into the second recognition, which is that there's no God worthy of worship, and my submission to the Lord Almighty in worship is farther than ritual. It's that I would embrace, one, the principles themselves in legislation would be solidly to the Lord Almighty, as He is the one to define principle. Two, worship in that comprehensive statement is including legislation. Then we've got the other exclusive definition for worship, which basically involves ritual. That my ritual in containing sincerity and the details of how I would do worship would only be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I take it from the stage of recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to recognizing the worship to basically announcing it in the loudest words. La ilaha illallah, but not to necessarily say loud and we're literally yell it out, because the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the Sahaba And Umar ibn al-Khattab, when Umar ibn al-Khattab was yelling it out and saying his dhikr out loud, the Prophet ﷺ overhears him and tells him, and lower your voice a little bit. And the ayah was saying that and telling us, ادعوا ربكم تضرعا وخفية. And do that dua in where you make the dua tadarru' and make it in a low voice to maintain your khushu'. Wallahu Akbar, and making that other announcement, Allahu Akbar, that the Lord Almighty taking it. Wait a minute. So after doing that, La ilaha illallah, and then going into another type of dhikr, Allahu Akbar. What is Allahu Akbar? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bigger than everything? No, it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bigger than everything. It's basically announcing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only is bigger, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater, and that everything basically turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and has no way to get any support, any provision, any form of power without getting it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their power. So when you think of al-kibar, or you think of kubur, or you think of that power or greatness, magnificence, you think of one, you think of volume, you think of size, or you could also think of power. So when you say Allahu Akbar, you recognize, despite every single thing that you might see containing power, or anything that you might see having the potential, or anything that you might see having some form of what keeps them in a position deserving submission, you give it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that way you recognize that submission is only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that bring you? That brings you izzah. Izzah. Why izzah? What is izzah anyways? Izzah is honor. What is izzah? It's the sense that you are not waiting and dependent on others for moving on. You recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that basically has the power, has the greatness. So therefore, for me to reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would know that He's the one that gives izzah. That way, I would never give up on my own principle, because I probably fear that I might lose the provision, or probably lose maybe the position, etc. I recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to grant me that izzah, because the izzah belongs to Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is magnificent. أحب إلي مما طلعت عليه الشمس. Just that dhikr is better than a day of having the sunrise. In other words, when you say طلعت عليه الشمس, is a day where you're listening to the birds singing, you're basically feeling, oh, it's a new day, beautiful day outside, etc. Oh, ready for another day, full of energy, full of all these different things that you could do. But then what do you take? You basically take that dhikr that it brings you the most delight, more than the delight of starting a new day in brightness, starting a new day in hope, because you recognize that this day where I would begin with subhanallah, the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing my place of centricity, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to grant me izzah. That would mean there's no better day to start your energy, as recognizing that even if things fail out on me, I would not look towards or you would not look, let's do it that way, you and I, we would not look towards people as giving us hope, but we would look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gives us hope. We would look that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to bring about glory, is the one to bring about the centricity towards guidance, is the one to give us all the different things that would make us live happy, and is the one to give us the centricity of letting us recognize who we are, what we are, and where we're going. Remember the tafsir that we had done for Ayat al-Kursi. Keep that one in mind, because I could not think of another ayah to contain all the different foundations of Tawheed more than Ayat al-Kursi. Ayat al-Kursi is a main center for Tawheed. Let's see. عن أنس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال إن الله لا يرضى عن العبد يأكل الأكلة فيحمده عليها ويشرب الشربة فيحمده عليها. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's say, God is pleased with the servant who eats a meal and praises him for it, and drinks a drink and praises him for it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically happy. And what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased? What does it mean? So does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala get angry and get pleased and all of that? How do we understand all of that? I thought those were human reactions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically told us in different hadith that he is pleased, or he may get angry, or certain reactions, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will display, but in the end, يَلِيقُ بِجَلَالِهِ, in a way that basically fits his glory. How? We don't know exactly how, but we would just leave it at that, for us to know that no matter how small that moment of recognition, probably just as small that you probably got a sandwich and you ate your sandwich, or you just praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sandwich. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased to see that you were praising him for that meal, taking the moment to just recognize, if it's a meal, I'm ready to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's a moment to sleep, Alhamdulillah, it's taking a moment to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma bismika wada'tu jambi, wa bika arfa'u, Allahumma in amsakta nafsi farhamha, wa in arsaltaha fahfadha bima tahfadhu bihi ibadaka as-salihin. Taking the moment, but that's too hard for me to memorize. Say it in English if you may. In your Urdu language, whatever language you would say. Well, what is the translation? Oh Lord, I rest my side by your name. If it wasn't for your power, wouldn't have been capable of doing it. And I raise my side by your name. If you did not give me the power to do it, I would not have been capable of doing it. Allahumma in amsakta nafsi. Ya Allah, if you take my soul and you determined that it would be basically dying within its sleep, farhamha, so give it mercy. وَإِنْ أَرْسَلْتَهَا فَاحْفَظْهَا بِمَا تَحْفَظُ بِهِ عِبَادَكَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And if you had determined that it would basically, if it would be determined that it would be with those that had been basically decreed to have died, then join it with the Salihin. If you had decreed that it would be returned to me, return it with rahmah, not illness, but with rahmah, with mercy. So if you actually look at it, it's quite interesting. There are certain moments that we are vulnerable to a number of different weaknesses. Maybe when we're eating, when we're drinking, when we're going to the bathroom, when we are about to sleep, etc. Those are the moments that we are certainly either prone to maybe heart attacks like early in the mornings. Most heart attacks actually happen early in the morning. 2, when you're prone to different things while you're asleep, and therefore you're taking that moment that to remember that when you're prone, whether during early in the morning or at night, there's a certain dhikr to keep you connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you go to the bathroom, you are prone to the shayateen having their influence on you without you realizing. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to give you protection from illnesses, to give you protection from the shayateen that you may not see, or probably the different harms that would be surrounding you, and perhaps they could also be another factor of probably increasing in mental illnesses without us realizing, different things that probably contribute, and factors that probably contribute in affecting us. And that's why is Sayyidah Aisha in the other hadith, well, look at this one, after drinking a drink, he would also praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sayyidah Aisha summarized all of this and said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يذكر الله على كل أحيانه. That the Prophet ﷺ would remember the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all positions, in all situations, even if he was going to be intimate with his wife. Allahumma jannibna shaitan wa jannib shaitana ma razaqtana. Ya Allah, keep shaitan away from us and keep shaitan away from what you had granted us. And what to say in those different moments that you may not recognize. How do shayateen actually affect us? We don't really have the details of how, but we were ordered to make those du'as to protect us from shayateen. Can they affect us mentally, physically, or just metaphorically? Well, if it was metaphorically, then we wouldn't have actually needed to make all those du'as because it's just a metaphor. It's not realistic. But the amount of du'as that are ordering us to make those du'as in certain timings, in certain situations, in certain practices, in certain even places, like the bathroom, certain timing, like if you look at the timing, early in the morning, when the person is about to be intimate, when the person wants to go to the bathroom, when the person is about to go to sleep, you're preparing your body for something, whether to give up on energy or to invest in energy. You're preparing your body to focus on something. Does or do shayateen recognize that in those moments that we are basically lacking the focus, and then do they use those moments to probably affect us, harm us, who knows how? Allahu A'lam. So that's why right there we could see, Sayyidah Aisha tells us that the Prophet ﷺ was always making that dhikr. But Anas ibn Malik, he said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دخل الخلاء. If he would enter al-khala. Al-khala is basically, to me, an empty space. But this is not talking about an empty space. There's nothing here. I'll just go in. No. Al-khala is basically the area where they would basically, let's say, use in the call of nature, basically, in that area. And that was whether before those indoor bathrooms were made. So they used to go for something that is basically considered as il-gha'it. Il-gha'it doesn't mean...
Is that like an outhouse?
Well, yes. They used to basically use the bathroom in an area out in somewhat wilderness, so in the corners and the sides of the city, away from where everyone is at. Imagine being diabetic and needing to do that, Ya Rabbi. So they would have to walk all the way there and basically do their call of nature there. They would dig a hole, basically do their business, and then close it. That was it. Okay. So it wasn't until later that they basically would then, I guess, designate an area within their home, and then that area was considered as not necessarily do it at home, meaning doing their business at home. It was probably doing it in a container or something and then taking it out. Okay. All right. So whenever he would basically go for the call of nature, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubthi wal-khaba'ith. You know what? I didn't even see the translation. Oh God, I seek refuge in you from evil and evil ones. Not quite accurate. So scholars had differences of opinions on what is al-khubth and what is al-khaba'ith. What are you seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from? So the first opinion said al-khubth is basically the male evil things, meaning the male jinn, and the female jinn. That's the first opinion. The second opinion said no, al-khubth is basically the impurity itself. Anything that is impure, whether we're speaking about urine, we're speaking about human defecation, or we're speaking about stool, or whatever impurity is out there, we're actually asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us basically maintain our purification. So why the purification? Why even is that a story or even an issue at all? So when you look at Surah, and I think we have done that one before in Surah al-Muddathir, يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فاهجر. We could say that the focus on maintaining purification in body, place, and garment is considered that it has an impact on your ability in containing, in absorbing, in making a relationship between you and purification, and inner purification, that is. So if the person is externally impure, their ability to absorb the internal purification is definitely going to be harder on them. So what does that mean? That means that impurity on your body and what your body basically is touched by, so the different contaminations that are touching your skin, that your skin basically absorbs that and slows down the process of your spirituality and slows down the absorbance of your heart and how it absorbs truth, principle. And the more contaminated the person is, the less, let's call it, a power of absorbance within their heart. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us to do, even when the person is probably intimate, to do wudu, to reduce, even if they didn't want to take a shower in the middle of the night, to reduce, basically go and, whether male or female, take the moment, urinate after intimacy, then wash the area, do your istinja, and then make wudu. Wait, make wudu? Well, why? Because, well, the complete thing is not the complete shower. That's what matters, I thought. Yes, but you reduce the effect that it basically had on your body, and that's the sunnah, is basically to reduce the amount of impurity that is touching your body. Why? To keep you healthy physically, to keep you healthy spiritually, to keep you healthy within your heart and internally. That way, you could be in a state of dhikr at all times. So that's the first opinion. The second opinion is that al-khubth is relating to impurity. Al-khaba'ith would be the female jinn, and the jinn that reside as a plural. Al-khaba'ith would be the jinn that would reside in those impure areas. So you are basically seeking protection from the influences and the impact that they might have on you, whether internally or externally. Let's see. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تقبل صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. Let's see the English translation. The prayer of any of you is not accepted if he breaks his ablution until he performs ablution. Not sure the translation. I mean, yes and no. Let's see what that means. So, لا تقبل, meaning it would not be accepted. Up to here, fine. So anybody that is seeking to do prayer, إذا أحدث. What is الحدث? الحدث, there are two types of hadath. There are, let's write it down so we could actually see. Oh, you could actually move this one. I don't know why that one's on. Okay, where's the tool? Okay, sorry about that. Now I'm using dual screens. So.
What was tuqbal again?
Tuqbal means accepted, Noura.
Okay, jazakallah khair.
Yep, wa iyyakum. Okay, here we go. Found my annotate. And did I actually pause the screen? Oh, great. Oh, there we go. All right. So what is the ahdath? Al-hadath is two kinds. Number one, you've got al-hadath. First of all, what does the word al-hadath actually mean? Al-hadath means impurity in general. Okay? Any impurity. But there are two kinds of impurities. There's the major impurity. Let's write it down. There's the major impurity, which is called al-hadath al-akbar. And that requires a complete shower. Okay? Like what? Being intimate from janaba, basically. Two, finishing the menses, the period, finishing postpartum. That would be basically requiring a shower. What about becoming Muslim? Differences of opinions between scholars, whether it requires a shower or not. Wallahu a'lam, it doesn't require a shower. The other type of impurity is actually called the minor impurity. Okay, so what is a minor impurity? A minor impurity, it doesn't require a shower. A minor impurity just requires that, sorry, I'm in a different position. It requires wudu. Like what? So anything that would break your wudu, whether we're speaking about number one, number two, basically urinating, defecation, or basically sleeping, passing gas, those would be requiring renewing your wudu. It's basically khuruj min as-sabilayn. Those would be the minor impurity, and certainly requiring that you would redo wudu. Differences of opinions on things like vomit, does that require wudu? Touching a dog, not that I'm encouraging you to get a dog, but petting a dog does not require you to make wudu. Okay, that doesn't require you to make wudu. Differences of opinions on things, maybe changing a baby's diapers. Do I have to redo my wudu if I'm changing my baby's diapers? Differences of opinions on that. Okay, just, mentioning a couple things. Okay. Minor impurity, al-hadath al-asghar. Al-hadath al-asghar, making the major impurity, al-hadath al-akbar. So, al-hadath al-akbar and al-hadath al-asghar. Okay, let's see. لا تقبل صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ, unless and until you make wudu. Okay, so in that situation, that a person is supposed to be in a state of purity. All right, so when we speak لا تقبل صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ, that's basically telling us So what is that supposed to mean? Well, that's supposed to mean that there is a certain embracement in order to fully open up your, let's say, your spiritual capacity to absorb truth, absorb Islam, absorb the dhikr, absorb the light. You cannot get the light if your body is filled with the darkness of contamination. So you have to basically remove such contamination to keep you ready and prepared and basically open to contain all the different light that is needed to enter and penetrate your heart. عن عثمان بن عفان رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من توضأ فأحسن الوضوء خرجت خطاياه من جسده حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره. The Prophet ﷺ said, let's see, whoever performs ablution is basically wudu, and does it well, his sins will leave his body, even coming out from under his fingernails. What does that look like? Is that literally? Or is that metaphorically? Let's say, man tawadda, anybody that would make wudu would basically, if they perform, sorry about that, but my son claimed sick today, so he's staying home. Gotta make sure that he's under my supervision. Okay. من توضأ فأحسن الوضوء. If a person would, well, what does it mean to perfect wudu? What it means to perfect wudu is basically to not miss out any spot, to basically do il-wudu with sincerity, is basically to do il-wudu as the Prophet ﷺ had done it. Okay? That's to perfect il-wudu. خرجت خطاياه, that the sins would depart from his body حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره, to the point that it leaves from underneath his fingernails. Wait. So do the sins actually pile up on our skin? Or is that a metaphor? At the end, what we would know is that the Prophet ﷺ literally said حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره, that sin piles up on our body. Or is this talking about حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره, meaning the implication of sin? The implication of sin. A person may have committed a sin, and the implication of sin had affected this person's body, and therefore the implication leaves the body. The implication of sin. In other words, the darkness, the contamination that's going to block the person's ability, their heart ability, their spiritual ability to absorb light. Is that the case? That's a different opinion, another interpretation. Or is it حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره, literally, that there's some effect that sin might have that you may not recognize, and that it affects you physically and might weaken you, might actually have in certain areas, that it might actually have its effect later on your body. So to do il-wudu and to do that, basically tahara, that it would give you not only the power to absorb and take in light, but it would also give you the power to stay healthy. And the implication of sin is basically reduced right there. So it would basically literally leave your body. That sin would also have some physical influence as well, if you're taking the words literally. So how do we understand this? Well, we could only say that this is what the Hadith says. And for those that want to interpret it literally and probably do further studying, that would be quite interesting. For those that wanted to say the implication of sin, we would know that, yes, the Lugha Arabiya can take and can, that interpretation, let's say, would not necessarily be going off what the Hadith is saying. That the implication خرجت or حتى تخرج من تحت أظفاره, meaning أثر. And there's in لغة عربية, we would basically have sometimes الضمير المستتر, or sometimes we would have basically تقدير, and that تقدير meaning, well, what really is that meaning, and how do we understand this, and etc. So that's in لغة عربية. Noura, you had a question, dear.
Oh, I was just gonna say that subhanallah, like when you're menstruating, it's like double important to do the other acts of dhikr, because
Agree. Ahsanti,
yeah.
Noura. Ahsanti. That was a good reminder. That was a good reminder that during menstruation, don't forget to increase in your dhikr, because you're already reducing from your salah, from perhaps for those that would consider that reading Quran is not permitted during the cycle, and that's a considerable opinion, and also a considerable opinion that it is permissible to read Quran, but that's a different conversation that we'll inshallah probably cover. But certainly increase in another type of dhikr while you're menstruating, and don't necessarily let your distance from salah reduce from your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's go for the other hadith. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال سمعت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن أمتي يدعون يوم القيامة غرا محجلين من آثار الوضوء. Ya salam. My nation will be called on the day of resurrection with radiant faces and limbs from the traces of ablution. I mean, I can't make a better translation. So on Judgment Day, what would happen? Wait, what do you mean radiant? What would really happen? Is it that wudu itself would actually have some form of light as well, or how do we understand this? All right. Inna ummati yud'awna yawm al-qiyamah. That my nation would be called on Judgment Day. Would be called on Judgment Day, and he would recognize his nation, that is the Muslim nation, by al-ghurr al-muhajjalin. What is al-ghurr? So, I mean, al-ghurr is basically the tip of the forehead. That's al-ghurra is right there. Al-ghurr al-muhajjalin are certain kinds of horses. Certain kinds of horses. Oh, hold on. Let's actually find that, right? Al-ghurr. And I want to show you those kind of horses. Al-muhajjalin. Let's look at it. Okay. Let's see. Al-ghurr al-muhajjalin. What does that even look like? Oh, no. Let's see. There you go. This is the type of horse. So these types of horses, let's look at it right there. That's the type of horse that, of course, they're just as these horses, they're distinguished with this light and bright, or this white spot on their forehead. The Prophet ﷺ would be capable of recognizing the ummah, the Muslim nation, from the light that would radiate from their heads, from their foreheads, or from their faces and limbs. Well, how does the light actually happen? It basically would be coming from al-tahara, from the ablution, from the wudu that they would be doing. Go ahead, Layla Ali.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So is the light going to help with crossing of the sirat?
Ahsanti. Ahsanti. Good girl. Why is the light even important? Couple things. Number one, for al-ghurr al-muhajjalin, The light is important because the Prophet ﷺ, there's a certain stage where there is الشفاعة, when the Prophet ﷺ would intercede. So in order to distinguish the Muslims from the other people, he would basically recognize them by a certain feature. It's like a certain mark. The mark of wudu would be looking like that light, like on the forehead. That's the mark that he would be capable of knowing, yes, this is part of that ummah, and therefore they would get to have a drink from al-Kawthar. Al-Kawthar, how do we get al-Kawthar? Al-Kawthar, I thought it was in Jannah. Yes. Al-Kawthar, the mainspring of al-Kawthar, it's actually coming from Jannah. But that Kawthar would also flow outside of Jannah to the premise, into a certain area in the field of Arasat Yawm al-Qiyamah. On a certain field where everyone is standing in that resurrection, there's a certain area that there's water right over there. And whoever would drink from that would basically never feel thirsty again. No cups. It would basically be the hands of the Prophet ﷺ. The second time that this light is needed is because there's a certain point in Yawm al-Qiyamah, during and right before Sirat, it will be completely pitch black. It would be completely dark. It would be so dark that the person would not be capable of distinguishing where to go. So they would pass a Sirat, and the only flashlight that they would have is basically the flashlight al-Ghurr al-Muhajjalin, is basically the light of the good deeds that they were doing during the day when they were living this life. That would transform into a flashlight, or that would basically transform into the light that would radiate the path to them to get to Jannah. Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us part of those. Allahumma ameen. So when you're speaking about that light, this light, it would be so recognized as in Surah Al-Hadith. They would say, انظرونا نقتبس من نوركم قيل ارجعوا وراءكم فالتمسوا نورا فضرب بينهم بسور له باب باطنه فيه الرحمة وظاهره من قبله العذاب. Then the munafiqeen, look, we're getting from the right there, انظرونا نقتبس من نوركم. We're going to get some of your light. It's going to radiate on us, and we'll just do just fine. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, you cannot get from this light. You don't get to get the privilege to get that light coming onto you. But we were with you at one point, they say. That what happened? You were with us at one point, but you let dunya get you carried away, and you decided to walk away. I would be really scared of this one, because it's so scary to be amongst a group of salihin, maybe listening to a dars, maybe committed to a dars, and then all of a sudden this person was not capable of being committed. Why weren't you capable of being committed? What happened? What sin slowed you down? What sin basically let you not have the energy to get up and join? That's why Abu Sufyan al-Thawri, or Sufyan al-Thawri, not Abu Sufyan, but Sufyan al-Thawri and many other salihin, they used to say, I would know that I had committed a sin that I had probably forgotten about, by my ability to get up in the middle of the night and do Qiyam al-Layl. If I'm not capable of doing Qiyam al-Layl at night, I would know that I committed something in the day. If I'm not capable of memorizing or reading Quran or etc., that means I've got some shortcomings that I need to work on. So therefore, we would just need to remember that potential that you're capable, that's why we make the dua, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. We would make the dua, Allahumma a'inni, Ya Allah, give me the energy, ala dhikrik, to remember and be able to remember and say your name. Wa dhikrika wa shukrika, and give me the ability and the potential to be thankful in all the different bounties that you had blessed me with. وَحُسْنِ عِبَادَتِكَ, and to be a person of sincerity, and to be a person that is doing the best of the worship. Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Continuously make that. Yes, I have these moments where I can't do what Sifat al-Safwa were doing. I can't do what those chosen people and those people that were considered the elite in their ibadah, I can't do what they're doing. I'm not capable of memorizing the way that other people had memorized. I'm not capable of being a person that would be capable of listening to every single day a dars or a halaqa or etc. That's too much on me. I can't do it. Not even a recording. I try, but then keep making the dua at least. Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. If you're externally feeling the weakness, internally feeling the weakness, then reach out with your tongue to let that vibrate in giving you the energy, in giving you the momentum, in giving you the intention.
And it's a good idea to say in the salah after the, because so you don't forget to say it.
So you would not. I would also like to say, when you make dua, don't always say it in a very low voice, but it's okay to say it in a way for others to hear it, to remind them. To remind them. You're just walking probably, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrik wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. اللهم إني أسألك فعل الخيرات وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين, and keep making these du'as for others to memorize it from you, for others to have it basically reminding them, and also making ameen for you as well. Some people are shy to say it out loud. I'm not saying out loud and making it where it's basically, of course, annoying others, but make it in a way that it's reminding others, and then keep it something that is calm. إن شاء الله. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ويل للأعقاب من النار. What does that mean? Woe to the heels from the fire. And when did he say that? And why did he say that? So the Prophet ﷺ had seen a man that was doing wudu. But this man was only leaving behind a small, kind of like the size of a quarter, a small size, basically not too big. He was not including it in wudu. He was wanting to rush wudu. So the Prophet ﷺ said, wail. What is wail? Woe is how they translated it here, because wail is ism fi'l. What does that mean? So scholars actually had differences of opinions on what the wail really means. Is it a warning? Is it a valley in hellfire? What is really al-wail? Or is it, when you say ism fi'l, it's basically sounding out pain? That wail It's the person himself is basically saying, well, there's going to be a magnificent, painful punishment for this. So basically making wail to sounding out the pain, to sounding out of an expected punishment for this. للعقب. What is العقب? العقب is basically one, the heel, two, the behind, etc. So here, وَيْلٌ لِلْعَقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ, the Prophet ﷺ, the context, the man wasn't completing his wudu right. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying, وَيْلٌ لِلْعَقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ, if you leave those heels and those ankles behind and not include them in your wudu, you would see those heels or those areas basically included in a punishment that you would not be capable of handling. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's see.
And he didn't. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So he didn't say it specifically to him. Was it more of a general?
So
I mean, the guy would know that he's.
Fair enough. So in Lugha Arabiya, or in general Noura, all the ahadith. Let's look at this one. Remember, Noura, we've said this one before. العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. لا بخصوص السبب. What does that mean? So the theme is basically based on the generalization in the statement, okay, and not the context, and not necessarily the context that it was mentioned in. العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. That's what matters. So if the Prophet ﷺ was telling that man that anybody that would do that practice, anybody that doesn't take their wudu seriously, is going to be included as getting the same punishment for the same action. Got it?
No, that's not what I meant.
Okay. Explain it.
Okay, so what I meant is, was he specifically talking to that man when he was correcting him, or was he doing it in a way that was general?
No, he was talking in general, Noura, but some scholars said that it was speaking to him if he were to stay in that action and not fix it.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I know, like, he used to correct people, not like first person. You know what I mean?
Right. But if this man is to basically practice this practice where he's imperfecting his wudu, then the Prophet ﷺ was basically telling, well, in general, the statement is general. وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ, that in a general, woe to the heels from fire. He didn't say woe.
He didn't say like
to your heels.
Yeah. Okay.
He didn't say it that way. He said woe to the heels. He didn't say your heels. All right. He didn't say your heels, but he said, وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. You gotta perfect your wudu, because the heels will also be punished for an imperfection in the wudu. He didn't tell him. He said it in a general statement. Okay. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فلا يغمس يده في الإناء حتى يغسلها 3 فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده. Okay. إذا استيقظ أحدكم, if one of you wakes up from his sleep, he should not dip his hand into the vessel until he washes it 3 times, for he does not know where his hand had been during the night. Can't do a better translation than that. That's excellent. So, إذا استيقظ أحدكم, the Prophet ﷺ was basically giving us certain adab, certain mannerisms. If you wake up and Don't go rushing to probably, I don't know, getting some cereal or probably serving yourself a sandwich. Before you do anything and touching anything, take the moment to basically, before you put your hand and before you dip your hands in any utensil that contains water, or before you dip your hands into anything, well, make sure you wash your hands before that, because you don't know where your hands had been throughout the night. You could have been itching in a certain area that probably is impure. You never know what was basically happening while you were asleep. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us the adab of how to contain and how to maintain that purification within our inner purification. So wait a minute. I mean, if the person's okay with it, well, remember, just as we don't let najasa touch our body, we don't consume it either. We don't consume najasa in either, not even if it's just traces of it. Not even a trace of najasa. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, make sure you keep your mouth clean even from any trace of impurity. Let's see. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يحب التيمن ما استطاع في شأنه كله في طهوره وترجله وتنعله. Simple. The Prophet ﷺ loved to start with the right side as much as he could in all his affairs. Excellent translation. In his purification, his combing, and his putting on his shoes. That's exactly right. The translation can't be better. That the Prophet ﷺ, in all his matters, he would always start with the right side. Wait a minute, so why the right side? Why not the left? What's the difference? I mean, it's just a side. What does it have to do with anything? Because your Jannah is on the right. Because the angels, there are certain angels that would be recording and basically registering your good deeds, they're also on the right. It's basically because the right side is basically to basically keep you with that commitment. And we don't really know the details of why physically the right side. Is there any influence that it might have on our mind? Is there any influence that it might have on our spirituality? On our heart? The heart is more towards the left, not the right. Right? So, is there any difference? We don't really know. But we just know that the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us to always start with the right, because it basically has its influence to get you into the training of taking right and leading you to the path of the right, and going basically later on going to Jannah. And even on Judgment Day, when you practice being on, let's say, the power of right, when you look at Yawm al-Qiyamah, what happens? What happens in the ayah in Surah Al-Haqqa? فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ, what happens? فَيَقُولُ هَاؤُمُ اقْرَءُوا كِتَابِيَهْ إني ظننت أني ملاق حسابيه فهو في عيشة راضية في جنة عالية قطوفها دانية كلوا واشربوا هنيئا بما أسلفتم في الأيام الخالية. Hold on, what happens? There's a certain moment on Judgment Day where the deeds that you had committed, there's a moment of tatayur al-suhuf. All the deeds that you had done, they would be written down, and then the person is not going to be capable of doing any physical movement, but everybody recognizes that if such a document that contains all my deeds, if it falls on my right hand, هَاؤُمُ اقْرَءُوا كِتَابِيَهْ. That person, when they would get their book in their right hand, they would yell out and say, come and read my book. So proud of themselves that they had made it. إِنِّي ظَنَنْتُ أَنِّي مُلَاقٍ حِسَابِيَهْ. Does that mean ظَنَّ to mean speculation that they doubted? No, this is a yaqeen. I knew I was living in yaqeen. إني ملاق حسابية فهو في عيشة راضية. Verily, then in that situation, once they get the book in their right hand, فهو في عيشة راضية, they would be living in a عيشة, in a life of content. قطوفها دانية, where the fruits are near. The قطوفها دانية. The malaika would be saying, كلوا واشربوا هنيئا, eat and drink happily. بما أسلفتم, for all the different things that you had basically committed during those days where no one was giving you support. You were lonely. You were seen as strange. أيام خالية. You didn't have the support. You were like lacking friends, lacking supporters, and you didn't have those people that wanted to basically join you because you were mufarrideen, part of the mufarridun. You were part of those rare people. Remember the hadith that we did yesterday? سبق المفردون. The mufarridun, the people that were rare. The people that are, what is it? بدأ الإسلام غريبا وسيعود غريبا. Islam will started out in a strange way, will come back in a strange way. And not the hadith, but the narrator said, طوبى للغرباء. This is a mudraj, that piece of it. That's an addition that the muhaddith himself, the narrator, had said, طوبى للغرباء. And lucky to those that are strange, the people that are calling you a weirdo. Well, guess what? That's actually right there. Remember, even the prophets and the Sahaba, and they were always basically seen as strange, as weird. And because they were seen as strange and weird, that's to let us know that if people are not being friends with you and people are seeing you strange, people are basically not wanting to see you as the person of fun, the person to be around, well, that's al-ayyam al-khaliya. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, make that training to get everything with your right hand, to start with your right, because even on Judgment Day, you want to get your book and get your brain, get yourself basically stronger on your right side, so that has the potential. Is that the only thing? Allahu A'lam. We just know the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us to always do everything with our right side, except the things that involve najasa, to do it with the left side. Why? To maintain the things that basically have the impact of having the impact of your inner purification, etc. Always stay clean. Even when you shake your hand, reach out with your right hand, basically combing the hair. الترجل is basically combing the hair. التنعل is wearing the shoes. Always start with your right side. عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا أكل أحدكم فليأكل بيمينه وإذا شرب فليشرب بيمينه فإن الشيطان يأكل بشماله ويشرب بشماله. Here's another reason why to eat with the right side. If you are to eat, then eat with your right hand. And if you were to drink, then drink with your right hand. For the shaitan is the one that eats with his left hand and drinks with his left hand. So what am I supposed to do? You're basically supposed to be different from shaitan. You're supposed to be a person that mimics and resembles basically the Salihin, the Prophet, and certainly those on Judgment Day that would basically get the book in their right hand. This is it. Inshallah. We'll continue tomorrow. We've got, hey, we don't have much left, inshallah. So any questions before we end, inshallah? What about left-handers? Okay. So a person that is left-handed, okay, if we're talking about eating and you don't want to spill on yourself, just a note. Scholars actually had differences of opinions when the Prophet ﷺ, he saw a man drinking with his left hand or eating with his left hand. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him to eat with his right hand, and he said, I can't. Now, then the man, because of the way that he said it, his arm basically got paralyzed for the rest of his life. Now, scholars had differences of opinions on whether that punishment was as a result of eating with the left hand, or whether, meaning that because it is obligatory to eat with the right hand, and therefore haram/forbidden to eat with the left hand, or is it that the man was punished that way because of the disrespectful tone and because of the disrespect that he had given the Prophet ﷺ? The scholars that said it was as a result of disrespecting the Prophet ﷺ, they had regarded that eating with the right hand is a sunnah and not obligatory. So, if a person is probably a left-handed person and they're afraid, they tried as much as they can to eat with the right hand, but I guess their nerves in that area, they're not strong enough and they keep spilling on themselves, and they definitely don't want to make a scene and and spill on themselves, especially, of course, if their nerves are not too strong in that area, etc. So in that situation, of course, there is an opinion that regarded that eating with the left hand is makruh and not necessarily haram. Just wanted to note that one. Okay, just wanted to note that one. But all the other things, even if a person is a left-handed, it's not going to be hard for them to wear their right shoes first. So do as much as you can to always start from the right, eat with your right, and drink with your right, etc. But of course, if it is probably hard on you, I'm just letting you know that there is that opinion. Put the effort to be drinking with your right and eating with your right as much as you can. Do the training as much as you can. But if you're not capable of doing so and you tried as much as you can, I'm just letting you know that there's an opinion that regarded it as makruh. Well, wait a minute. What does makruh even mean? Makruh means that that you would not be held accountable. You're not at sin for not practicing the right rule, meaning the right hand rule, okay? And that you would be rewarded if you are to practice it, but you would not be at sin for not doing it, okay? So I hope I answered that one. That's another opinion,
Yeah,
which
just
is
jazakallah khair. Yeah, I was
what.
more talking about like with the shoes and all that other stuff. But yeah, jazakallah khair. Very good explanation.
All right. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. So right now we're doing it. How many hadith really? So we started out at 137. We didn't do much, but that's okay. Inshallah, we benefited. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll
Yeah, it's
continue.
not a race. Don't worry.
It's not a race, you think so? Oh, whew. I love it when Noura advocates for me and makes me feel that even when I go wrong, I'm still right. Right, Noura? There you go. It's not a race. Well, that's one thing I like about Gems of Light is that we need to be consistent and not necessarily just, somehow pass a certain curriculum and probably just reduce it. But no, we need to finish the curriculum. And inshallah, these hadith, I mean, by the way, in our pearls of the Prophet ﷺ, we had taken almost 400 ahadith. I was calculating them yesterday.
Wow. Allahu
Yep.
Akbar.
Yep, almost 400 ahadith. I was going over it and over and starting to calculate almost 400 ahadith. I don't know any other institution that had given 400 ahadith in one semester. So, alhamdulillah, ladies, wallahi, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen will bless the effort that you are putting in to join our classes. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the effort that the others are making this happen, whether it's Noura, Dr. Samia, or even those donors out there that are making this possible, because to pay for the teachers, to pay for even the website, even the Zoom, all of that, it basically requires a lot. Please make it dua for every single contribution, whether it's a contribution in effort, or whether it's a contribution in money, or whether it's a
And for
contribution.
you too.
Ameen, Ya Rabbi, ameen, ameen. And contribution in, at the expense of her own family, Noura, at the expense of her own family, basically doing a lot to make this happen. And barakallahu fikum jami'an, barakallahu fiki Noura, barakallahu fi every single person that made this possible. And make dua for those many that wanted to stay anonymous to contribute. Allah yabarik fikum jami'an. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.